Well, Dr. Easley, thanks for being on the show.
You bet, man.
Really appreciate your time.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, so behind me is a stack of Mansfield's book for manly men. So I'm curious, there's a stack back there. Do you just like the book? Do you give it away often? Because I've read his book a few years ago, and I really, really like it.
Stephen's a good friend.
Underlined. Okay.
He's a good friend, and I have some men's groups that I lead, and he a while back said, "Hey, I got boxes of these if you want some." So I took 10 of each to give to some of the young guys that I mentor, just as a conversation starter.
Yeah.
But Mansfield's a good friend, and I learned a lot from him, and we have some really good arguments together.
Oh, really? Okay. So I'm going to jump all around, I'm sure, because this question wasn't pre-planned. And but I'm actually curious, with your experiences and at your stage, where do you find community, that brotherhood that Mansfield talks about, to keep you sharp, to keep you accountable, to keep you sort of pressing forward?
I'm sorry.
And I assume it's
you're post-producing this, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'm
you're
making
totally
sure
fine.
this is completely off. Forgive me.
Yeah.
Forgive me, Kent. I'm just going to turn it off.
It's got the camera in the center, so I assume it's not an iPhone, huh?
No, I'm a communist. I like Samsung products. Power off. One of the things that I have done over the years, I learned.
Just saying it's off.
One of the things I learned years ago was to be a person that took initiative. Mm-hmm. Because if I want to be around people of influence and someone that can help me, I'm going to chase them. And I tell younger men to be a kind, persistent person. And so from my early teens and 20s, I was always looking for somebody that was further down the road than me. So my friendships, some of them go back 37, 8 years. The longest one is a guy I knew in third grade. And we're still friends to this day. He's a couple years older than me.
Is he in Nashville or is he somewhere
else?
He
lives in Texas, New Braunfels.
But you keep up?
I doubt 10 days go by, we don't talk.
Wow.
And I've probably got 6 men that I would say know my soul. I know theirs. Dave Gibson, who's been a friend for 37 plus years now. We have this saying, do you need a dope slap? Or do you need encouragement? And I think one of the challenges of men in general is they don't have that collegiality, that band of brothers Mansfield talks about, however you want to label it. But men who know your secrets, men who are on your side, men you can run to. I've had lots of surgeries, and those guys were praying for me. They would get on a plane if I asked them to. One did when I was in Chicago, didn't even want him to come. Next thing I knew, he was at my house in Illinois. So that has been, to me, I need it.
Yep.
I need other men who love me enough to tell me the truth, encourage me when I need encouragement, and we would do stuff together, hunting, fishing, climbing, backpacking, whatever it is we're into. But walking this Christian life with other people that are headed in the same direction is critical.
And what do you say to the young guy who sees the need in his own life for that community and yet feels like he is being a burden or maybe bothersome if he reaches out to an older guy that is further ahead of him on the same journey, but he doesn't want to, be a drag on his time? What do you say?
A couple things. One, in my generation, we talked about the generation gap in the 70s. Vietnam War was a good illustration where the administration, they were anti-establishmentarianism, and that it's not our war, we won't go, and the peace marches and long hair and burning flags, and we've seen that disconnect through the decades in the West. It's nothing new. I think the challenge for both sides of the continuum, I have I'm not going to probably say it as eloquently as I have in the past, but the old dismiss the young disrespect the old, and there's too much lost in the middle. Mm-hmm. And somehow you got to bridge that gap.
Yep.
And the young men that I pursue, and it is kind of a one-way street even for me today at 61. The guys that were on my porch last night, I took initiative with all those guys. I didn't, Now they'll tell me, you pick the day and night, and I'll be there. But rarely would a young man come up to me and say, and I'm not pretentious. I'm not presuming they want something I've got.
Yep.
But at the same time, I've got a little life experience. I've raised 4 kids. I've got 3 adopted kids. We've had our challenges. We've been through infertility, back surgeries, chronic pain, moving, changing cities, changing jobs. We all go through that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's nice if I got someone 4, 5, 10 years ahead of me to say, these are some things I learned. To the young guy, I would say, run the risk. Invite a guy for coffee. Hey, can I ask you some questions? I'm starting a business, or I'm thinking about leaving my job, or I'm not sure this is the field. I went to college for 4 years or 6 years or whatever, and I don't really like this. And should I be an entrepreneur? What does that mean? I think now the problem for older guys, they don't always know how to communicate to younger men. And that's why I said we have to learn both sides.
What do you mean by that?
When I was your age,
okay,
I walked uphill in the snow both ways to school, and that's off-putting to anybody who's a few years younger than you.
Sure.
And so older men, sometimes to be patient with them, you can always ask people about their family, about their career, about their religious beliefs. To me, a good question is probably the most important thing. And so like last night when we sat around, we just didn't yammer about turkey hunting and, whatever. I threw questions at them. And first thing I did, because some of these guys didn't know each other, was tell us your story, how you came to Christ. And I always love hearing that.
Yeah.
And then the next question was, who was like an influential person in your life and why? So I don't want to sit there and talk about movies and, activities and hunting season and all that endlessly. I enjoy that like anybody.
Yeah.
But at some point, let's go a little deeper into, how's your marriage?
Yeah.
How your kids doing? What's that one teenager that's breaking your heart right now?
Yeah.
Your wife wants 4 kids. You're not sure you want any. Your sex life when you're a young man gets, cattywampus when you start having little kids. What are you doing about that? And the good part is, I find young men are eager to talk about that.
Yeah.
The hard part is most older men are probably insecure. They probably have their own struggles. They don't know how to answer those questions. So it's a little bit bad analogy, but like dating. Hang out with this person. Do we get along?
Yeah.
Do we like the same food? Do we like to go shoot guns? Do we like to hunt? Do we like to fish? Do we like to watch movies together, read books together? And you got to find that time and a common interest.
Yeah.
Or to me, the irreducible minimum. To be friends, we'd have to have time together, and we'd have to have something in common, or we can't go anywhere.
Yeah. So you're saying to the young guy, take the risk, ask. Worst case scenario, the older, more experienced guy says, you know what, that'd be great. I just don't have time right now, and it's a no for now.
Or you have coffee with him once, and it goes nowhere. You move on.
Yeah. Okay.
Move on.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for that. So, a question that I did have planned for you was, and you mentioned it just briefly in passing, is I wasn't able to find a lot of information on this, but my understanding is that you do deal with chronic pain. So I'd love to hear more about what that is or what that's like. But my question is then, how do you push through something that I'm assuming is so painful, so prevailing, and even so distracting?
Big subject. Try to be brief. 2000, in my 40s, I am playing racquetball 2-3 times a week. I've got a personal trainer. I core aerate my yard. I spend all spring in my yard trimming trees, planting. I can change out the water heater in the house, the water pump on the car. I can do my own brake jobs. I can fix plumbing. I'm not real good with electricity.
It only takes once. I'm not going back there again.
Hire my friend, yeah. I can do plumbing and sweat pipe. I don't like to do it. Point was, I was raised in a culture where, you figured it out and you did it. I started having pain issues. I won't belabor, but it took several months to isolate that the pain was located in what's your lower lumbar region, L4-5S1. 85% of all men will seek medical attention for a lower back issue in their life. They might throw their back out in the yard or sneeze or pick something up. Most of that will heal in time. Unfortunately, I have what's called degenerative disc disease, probably because I was a little taller, probably because I was an athlete, actually worked against me. So fast forward, you go through all kinds of therapies. You try treatments, acupuncture, chiropractors, physical therapy modalities, over-the-counter drugs, pain medications, shots, injections, treatments. And finally, you have, at some point, if it doesn't resolve. So I've had 4 surgeries in my lower back, 3 in the lower back, and the major surgery was in 2010 where they fused my neck. And so you have 7 cervical vertebrae, C3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then T would basically be your first rib, let's call it, your collarbone rib. So they fused from C3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to T1 on the back of my neck. So I've got rods and pins and screws back there holding my neck together. And God never intended our spine to be cut on and fused. And so although it helps certain things, there's unintended consequences. So degenerative disc disease is a spinal issue, and because the spine conducts your pain when you hit your foot on the bed at night, it's the spinal cord that sends that information to the brain. Hey, ouch, stop. Well, now you're dealing with the conductive mechanism God put in our bodies, and so that is affected. And so chronic pain and spinal column issues is a very difficult thing to treat. So all that to say, I've been on the drugs. I've had the back surgeries. I was on opioids at high levels for years. In God's kindness, I'm off all that stuff now. I take a non-opioid medication that helps a little. But you used a key word, Kent, distraction. I call pain the chronic distraction, the persistent distraction. And, if I sit in that chair and I'm working on those computer monitors and reading, and it's to a point where I can't focus or function, then I have to take medications. I move around a little bit. I can't do a lot, but I spend about 15% of my time talking to people with chronic issues, because you've got to find a way through this, and it's not just taking more pills.
You're talking to them to get help through this?
No. This chapter is now me helping them through. I've got, in God's kindness, a Rolodex, or on the phone, a list of very close friends that are in the medical community. They know my issues. They trust me in my use of medications. And each year I get an MR and an X-ray, and I'll go do sort of a review of my spine. Not to bore you with details, but it's degenerative in nature. It's not getting better. And so I don't want a 5th surgery, but there's more than likely 1 or 2 more in my future. And so you're delaying that as long as possible. So the medical community want to help you, but it's complicated. So I've developed very close friends in the medical community, and to say, hey, if I need a favor, can you talk to me? I don't want opioids. I just want some counsel.
I see.
And working that. But the other side of it has been people hear my story. And you may not know Johnny Erickson Tada, but she's a dear friend. She's been in a wheelchair for 51 years this year. Very close friends to Cindy and me and her husband, Ken. Here she is, a quadriplegic. You could cut her leg and she couldn't feel it, but she deals with chronic pain from her spine. So a lot of people live in chronic pain, and opioids and other medications don't really help. They're distractions. They don't really help. But when you're grinding your teeth, when you're wishing you're going to die, when the doctors can't help you, the drugs can't help you, your faith is there, but you're still in pain.
Yeah.
So I have this sort of primer I work through with people. I have a friend dying of prostate cancer as we speak, and we get together every couple of weeks, and I just go through this little primer. Are you being your own advocate? Laying on the floor or laying in bed or watching TV all day is not going to help you. You've got to be your own advocate. What does that mean? You got to get up. You got to shave. You got to shower. You got to put some clothes on. You got to run an errand. Wash a load of clothes. You got to make breakfast. I mean, it's incremental things. You need to make an appointment. It's so hard to see a doctor today. It's so hard to get an appointment for an MRI or an X-ray or a CT scan or see a pain management doctor, because there's so many sick people. And so I just help them through the being your own advocate, what that means, dealing with insurance, third-party payments, co-payments. How much is it going to cost? Is this treatment worth your... And so people go crazy. They do everything at once, or they... I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah, no, please. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, we'll pick it back up.
Both number 1. Maybe because the weather tonight, they're all here.
Yeah, probably.
Good morning.
Check, check, check.
Almost ready.
Yep. Yeah, no worries.
Little dead mouse out there.
Oh, yeah?
That's not good.
As long as they're outside, not in the house.
Exactly.
Chronic pain, you were talking about how you help others through it.
Yeah.
And I was actually curious because when it comes to your line of work, it's a creative process. And it's like, it's one thing when you're dealing with pain, you just got to kind of buck up and go do your job. But I feel like it's another thing when it's like you're trying to overcome this pain because you need to think clearly.
Yeah.
How do you get past that as a challenge?
I don't have any simple answers. There's sort of a cycle in my world. You know, I'm a bookish guy. I'm an academic. I'm behind, a text and commentaries and writing. And there are times you just have to take a break. And I've done it long enough. I've got kind of a process. So it's not as though I'm reinventing the wheel every week to prepare a text, let's just say. But I would say the harder part for me, Kent, is in the course of relationships, because whether it's my wife, my kids, friends, their problems, and I don't mean to be unkind, but it can be a hangnail compared to what I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dying over here,
Yeah,
and you're complaining about this or that, and I don't mean that unkindly, but that's where people go who live in chronic pain.
Yeah.
And one of the best things I've learned, because when people do come to me and say, I thought about you all weekend, I threw out my back. I know, how do you do this? I was just down for a day. And I'll say, number one, it's not a competition. Number two, there's no comparison. Mm-hmm. Your pain is your pain. Whether it's your marriage, your emotional, your kid breaking your heart, you got fired, your money's up. It doesn't matter. Pain is a reality we all experience. So the relational capital is me more critical. And I have learned, I'm a little bit of a monk. I need to be away from people when I'm really in intractable pain.
Okay.
So we might have to cancel social engagements. We might have to say, I could probably power through it, but I know myself now to know I'd be miserable if I went to the symphony and had to sit there for 2.5 hours.
I see.
So give somebody else the ticket, Cindy. You go with someone else and some friends. And that's just something you navigate. And in God's kindness, it's seasonal. Sometimes it's better than others.
Yep. So I promise I'll quit doing this, but when you stepped out for a second, I saw the Valley of Vision.
Yes.
So how long have you had that? How do you use that?
I'm a little bit of a... If you pay attention to preachers, you know what they struggle with. And I have a lot of books on prayer.
Okay.
I wrote a book on prayer, which is just self-evident of how lousy I am at praying. But I came across this long before it was a leather-bound edition. I forget when the paperback, and I had paperbacks glued and had rubber bands on them.
Really?
I mean, I got them marked up, like a Bible. I love the language of what Bennett did here is an interesting story. But he arranged sermons and lyrics to a sort of poetic form. They weren't all written this way. He sort of took great liberty, let's say, and wrote these prayers.
The editor, essentially.
Arthur Bennett, who's with the Lord, he only wrote one of the prayers called the Valley of Vision. And the rest of them are for Alexander Toplady and Spurgeon, all kinds of people that are not attributed. There's no attribution in the book. So all that to say, the theology can be a little wonky in places, but it's just these men and women prayed in a language that, when I teach on prayer, I'll say, I triple dog dare you not to say the same prayer at lunch you said the last 27 lunches. Mm. We're talking to the God of the universe, and we use cliches and synonyms every time we pray. And this one, Ken Boa's book, Handbook to Prayer, is one that I take our young couples and mentors that I work with, and it's a 90-day thing. And what Ken did here was so cool. He just took a lot of thought. I'm making it sound simple, but he takes passages of Scripture. He simplifies them a bit, his own translations. He's a good Hebrew and Greek student, so he does a good rendering. And then he has bullets. So read these verses and then pray these bullets. And it's a 90-day program with some extra supplemental material. And the thing I love about these books is when I don't feel like worshiping, when I don't feel like reading the Bible, when I'm angry, mad, distant, apathetic, either one of these will get me recalibrated very quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I carry them with me. I have them electronically, but I prefer the book because I'm not distracted with the technology.
Yeah.
And so prayer, and there are certain passages that, I clung to desperately during 2 Corinthians 1:3-7 is the litany of, with this affliction for your benefit, this suffering for your benefit. And just to understand suffering is part of life. Prayer is the one way, generally speaking, communication relationship with God. Mm-hmm. I don't hear an audible voice, but when I read His Word, I hear Him.
Yeah.
And so both these texts help me in that prayer to me is a relationship, not a ritual. It's not a routine. It's a relationship.
Yeah.
And are you and I willing to say, I need to spend a few minutes with God?
Yeah.
Undistracted, away from the technology, away from, all the things that turn my head and heart.
Yeah. I had a friend that recommended the Valley of Vision within the last year and a half, probably, certainly 2 years. And at first I thought it was a crazy idea. Why would I get a book of essentially Puritan prayers to read through and pray? So after he, talked about it for a while, I got it. And in my book at home, it's the, paperback, it's page 119, it's the morning devotional. I forget exactly what the title of prayer is, but I read it every morning.
Wow. Good for you.
And it's just, I find that book really, really encouraging.
It's a good book.
So I'm actually curious. So you say, I was listening to one of your episodes on Michael inContext this morning, and it was from 2016, so I'm sure you don't remember it. But
I've slept since then.
But you say that that wisdom calls us to pay attention to what we're paying attention to. Yeah. And I really like that. And my question is, what should we be paying attention to? The modern business leader. There's so much going on, and business is not once and done. It's all about optimization. So should we be paying attention to world news, local news, politics, social media, parenting tips, business books? But there's so much out there. What should we be paying attention to?
Boy, I'm not a business man or woman, obviously, and my experience with government, with business, with large church organizations is going to be obviously a little different slant. I would say a couple of things. One, just in the last 10, 15 years, the entrepreneurial interest is fascinating. And especially among your peer and age group, which I applaud. I often say to my old crony friends, these guys got more guts and courage than we did. Because we went to work for companies that had infrastructure. These guys are willing to go risk. At the same time, we're always overcompensating for the liabilities of our elders. And I think it's typically unconscious. You can illustrate it when a CEO is fired or has a scandal, he or she, that committee will subconsciously overcompensate for the liabilities of the last leader. And I think we all do this. So that's one point. This entrepreneurial thing can become an idol. I want to do my thing. It's my enterprise, my money, my time, my. That's not dismissing entrepreneurship. It's just being aware of it. To more specifically your point, when I think of all this, I think of integrity. To me, the core attribute, the indivisible integer, you can't divide it. Integrity is probably the single most important part of a businessman or woman or pastor or worker in the field who's working an 8 to 5 or more likely a 6 to 6 job, that he or she is a person of integrity, that your word is what you say you're going to do it, that you follow through, that you can be trusted, that you keep a secret, that you don't gossip. When you have a problem, you go say, I can't get this done on time. I was wrong on my projection. I find that very, very rarely, unless a person is just wicked and co-opted, are they going to have a hard time with a person that has integrity. And so to me, whether it's leadership, entrepreneurship, entre-leadership, whether it's, fill in the blank, I'm looking for a man or woman that knows their strengths, their limitations, where they need help. We just started a church recently, and I'm doing things I haven't done in 30 plus years.
I believe it.
Opening a bank account, setting up online, and I'm going, why am I doing this stuff? I never had to do this before. I'm not entrepreneurial. And it struck me the other day when I was fighting with an online bank setup, which should be easy, right? And I was talking to the support, and they go, yeah, we're having a problem with our servers. I go, well, at least it's not my problem, Yeah. But do you have the elasticity to say, I'm going to do some things, but I'm going to do them well, but I'm going to go back to my little steering committee and say, guys, I don't want to do this. This is not the best use of my gifts, talent, strength. Don't ask me to be an accountant.
Yeah.
And so I think that integrity is knowing your strengths and liabilities, as well as I need help here, and being unafraid to say, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
Yeah. So when you say wisdom calls us to pay attention to what we're paying attention to, do you say that because it's so easy to just get caught up in the buzz and not be aware of what we're paying attention to? And when you realize how much you're paying attention to just things that really don't matter, that you realize it's a grand waste of your time, or just not a good use of your time. Is that why you're saying that? Pay attention to what you're paying attention to?
And just think of the trend of entrepreneurials. When I was younger, Josie Bass or Jossie Bass, however you pronounce it, that imprimatur, all the business books, Bennis, Nanis, Kouzes, Posner, all those guys, the Harvard Business Review guys, that was, my shelf had 120 some leadership books on it when I was in a church in D.C. and Texas, and when I was in Chicago. And I read all those books, the Lencioni books. And what I discovered in that is it was like pastors used to when someone would come on the problem of the marriage. Here's a book you need to read.
Yeah.
Here's a book you need to read. I'm not against that. I'm a reader, but I think what Kurt Thompson, by the way, Dr. Thompson was the one that gave me that line, give credit where credit is due, pay attention to what you're paying attention to. Because whether you're ADD or ADHD or you're too singular focused, it's good to take a breath. And think of when you open your technology, how many apps do you have running?
Yeah, fair bit.
And with OS, those who are in that system, now it's all tied into your screen wherever you are. It's a message, whatever, your social media. I intentionally will have my word processor and my Bible study software as the only two applications going on my machine. Because otherwise, I'm paying attention to social media. Oh, I got to do that email. I actually have 3x5 cards on my desk. You might see them. That's my to-do list that gets the distraction out of my head. I need to do this. Mm-hmm. And then I physically will push it aside because it has a life of its own. Yeah. My desk faces a wall, not a window, for a reason. I was squirrel before squirrel was cool. I can be so distracted by text. We work at home. My wife and I both have offices here. She needs something, I need something. So the singularity or compartmentalizing, what do you have to do today? So in business, if you're starting something or you have a problem, it would seem pretty logical and simple to say, what's the big, hairy thing I got to address? And then how do I incrementally tackle that? Mm-hmm. I'd much rather email, and I spent an hour this morning emailing a guy with a theological question. I enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. I literally spent an hour answering his email. Was that a good use of my time? I don't know. Yeah. Will he read it? I don't even know that. Yeah. But I enjoyed it. That's a bit of a squirrel. I could have said, in very brief, let's have a coffee, but that'll be an hour and a half. Yep. And so we're always making these value judgments, the urgent and the important, come across our table. To more specifically your question, I think there's so many squirrels and rabbits and birds flying through life right now, especially for young men and women. And we're looking at this next seminar, this next webinar, this next subscription, this next thing. I'm shocked with the number of monthly subscriptions 20 and 30-year-olds have. Streaming music, different apps they're into, different systems they like, different things that support their web. But Squarespace now, I guess, is the new thing. And they just keep bolting on these monthly $9, $8, $7, $10, $15 Sirius in your car. And I'm going, time out. What do you need? Mm-hmm. They're tantalizing. Mm-hmm. We'll do this for you, you know? And I think that's a good illustration of what must I do? Yeah. Not what can I do? Yeah. If you're not, you got to make some money today. Yep. You need to circle back and visit these 3 clients or these 3, fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. And I've got a system. Even as a pastor, I write probably 3 to 5 hand notes every week. It might be to a friend in pain. It might be to a person that was very generous and gave us a check for something. It might be someone I know struggling. Someone said, "Will you pray for me?" I hate saying yes because I'm either going to lie or forget or both. Yeah. So if I say yes, I'm going to take out a little piece of stock card, prayed for you this morning, meaning right now, thought about this verse, maybe that's a cheater's way to do it, but that's the way I do it. So I got that hand touch. I'm ministering to those people. What do I have to do today? Yeah. And if I told somebody I was going to pray for them, I better pray for them. Yeah.
When do you write those cards? Because I'm a big fan of handwritten notes also, and I used to do better at it. And now I'm not writing handwritten notes at all on a consistent basis. So you said you're doing 3 to 5 week. Is there a particular day of the week or time of the day that you're disciplining yourself to crank those out?
I'm not that disciplined. I'm a very disciplined person, but in my briefcase, I have a special folder that's got my stock cards, stamps, and envelopes. And so yesterday when I was getting my car washed, I could have looked at this and read news and emails and texted friends, and I brought that folder out and I cranked out 5 handwritten cards while they were washing my car. Okay. And so I keep that with me. When I travel especially, we were out of town last week and I wrote 2 just sitting in a hotel. So it's more looking for that downtime where I could waste it reading articles. And it's not always a waste to read articles, but I can get into it. I'm a news junkie, and I can get into a sinkhole with news that I read, or, something pops up on social media that's theologically, two of my friends are locked in a social media war right now that's pretty loud, and I'd love to weigh in, but wisdom says, leave it alone, Easley. Leave it alone. You're not going to help anything.
Yeah.
And I can get pulled into that.
Yeah.
Or I can say, and here's the other part of this that you probably know, and I never started out doing this. Years ago, there was a guy, it was a crisis. I left my home early, which I didn't usually do. We're having dinner with the family. This was a crisis. I went to his house. His daughter, their only child, had gotten pregnant. She was a teenager, and their world was falling apart. And so I go to visit this man and his wife, and I'm there an hour. And we prayed, and I went home. The next day, we were leaving for vacation. We had 2 kids at the time. We went up to Vermont. And even back, that's how many years ago, I had cards in my briefcase. And I had my devotion. We stayed in this beautiful place up in Vermont, and I got up early with my coffee before everybody woke up, and I'm sitting there reading my Bible, and I thought, that would encourage that couple. And I took that card out, I wrote the verses in it, I dated it, thinking about you guys, signed it. If I run into that guy today, and this is probably getting on to 25 more years ago, if I saw him today, he would open his Bible, and that card is a bookmark for him.
Really?
And he said to me, you'll never know what it meant to my wife and me that you were on your vacation and you were thinking about us.
Yeah.
Now, we all think about our friends on vacation.
Yep.
We wonder, guys, they lost that pregnancy. There's complication in the pregnancy. That couple can't get pregnant. If I'm thinking about them, maybe God's reminding me, you ought to encourage them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the handwritten thing you can see on my desk over there, I went back to using, fountain pens.
Oh, okay.
Because it forces me to write, to take time. It's tactile.
Yep.
It's more personal than writing it on a computer or an email.
Yes.
And I don't care if they save it or not, but sometimes that's a verse that God might use in spite of me.
Yes.
And they go, wow, I hadn't seen that before.
Yes.
So
yeah, that's great insight. Keeping the cards handy. That's helpful.
Yeah. Throw 5 or 6 of them pre-stamped in your briefcase and your thing, and keep them with you.
Yeah. So you touched on something else that I wanted to ask you about. So I'm going to do that now. So my question is, how do you think about leadership from a gospel-centered worldview? And I want to set it up with 2 thoughts. And one is, you're clearly a leader. From my understanding, you've led 3 churches. Now you're starting a 4th one. And by definition, 2 of those prior churches were large or even mega churches. You've been president and CEO of Moody Bible Institute. And, clearly you think deeply and care about what God has to say through the Bible on this issue of leadership. The second thing is, there's a lot of leadership hype today, a lot. And sometimes I wonder if the leadership hype has replaced wisdom to a degree. So I'm curious, how do you see wisdom speaking to leadership? Or even coming back to the initial question, how do you lead from a gospel-centered standpoint?
First, let's say God uses imperfect men and women. We have to acknowledge, if we looked at the kings of Israel, Jerusalem, when the northern and southern kingdom split, if memory serves, we had 38 kings, and I want to say north of 19 or more did evil in the sight of the Lord. And this was a monarchy. When you go through Scripture looking for good leaders, you're going to find Moses who strikes a rock. You're going to find Joshua who hesitated. You're going to find Jonah who went left when he should have gone right. On down the line, Peter who opens his mouth and denies his Lord. So let's just have the baseline. The ground at Calvary is level. We're all sinners. We're all co-opted. Some of us are megalomaniacs. Some are insecure. All points in between. Secondly, I think for each person, leadership to me is a gift and a skill set. When you look through the New Testament, we could debate the number of gifts, but Paul in Romans 12 has a list of gifts, those who lead diligently. So if we start with a wisdom-based literature of the Old Testament, which would be Proverbs, Psalms, storyline that we have where halak, the walk of wisdom, to understand what a wise person does. Proverbs 8, wisdom calls the simple, the naive, and the fool. The fool's the one who won't learn. The simple and the naive are able to learn. And wisdom calls from the mountaintops down the hallway. The picture in Proverbs is beautiful because wisdom is personified as a woman. Listen to her, follow her. And if you know Proverbs, what's the antithesis? She, the adulteress, she will call you down the corridors and the marketplaces. Her husband is away. Come lie with me on the couch. Mm-hmm. People miss this. He's not simply warning a young man to flee immorality. He's personifying wisdom. Mm. Wisdom will suck you, wickedness will suck you into the world. Wisdom will call you up. Mm. And so Proverbs 31, which is one of my pet peeves, it's not about this great woman. It's a personification, allegory of this is what wisdom looks like. Work hard, get up early, care for your family, care for your husband, for your wife. Mm. Wisdom is explained in this personification of this is wisdom. So coming back to your question, leaders are distracted. There's a lot of things going on. It has become a bit of a cult, this idea of leadership. I have friends who've written books. I won't name their names or the titles of their books, but I kind of cringe when I see one more book on leadership. I have an axiom: if leadership was easy, anyone could do it. If anyone could do it, we wouldn't need leaders. To be a leader is to be lonely. To be a leader is to be willing to say, I'll step into that. Cormac McCarthy's novel, No Country for Old Men, mm-hmm. a great line on the front of that book when he talks about, I got to know what I'm getting into. If I'm going to push all my chips into this, I need to know what I'm getting into. Mm-hmm. And leadership, you can't know every outcome, but you've got to be willing to say, I made a mistake. It was a bad decision. I'm sorry. I'll pop back to integrity. Mm-hmm. I'm rambling, but I think at the end of the day, leadership and common sense are far more important than the latest book trend ismology on the next wave.
Yeah. So do you see then, so it appears to me, and I'm young and I'm a novice, so I'm not going to pretend to have great thoughts on this, but it does appear to me like there's sort of become a popular trend or a common perception that anyone can be sort of a leader if you read the right books, and then you have these sort of, these steps, and then bam, you're a leader. Is that how we should be thinking from a wisdom standpoint, or should we be less concerned about, we're becoming a leader or not, and just more concerned about walking the path that God has for us?
There are two kinds of people in this world. Those who think there are two kinds of people and everybody else. So, I kind of fall on the side of if you want to be a leader, you need to pursue that. Now, let's talk about the pursuit of leadership. One of my professors is with the Lord, Dr. Howard Hendricks, used to talk about the fat man, the faithful, available, teachable. And he would say, I'm going to come to your church, and I want to see your fat men. And well, then that became politically incorrect, so he changed it to faith. It was faithful, available, integrity, teachable, and humble. And he just put those other words in there, so it wasn't fat man.
Okay.
I still like fat man better. Yeah. But his comment was, you give him a task. Will you help with the Bible study? Sure. That means making coffee at 6 a.m. ready to go for 80 people. Oh, man, I want to teach the Bible. I need somebody to make coffee. And then his comment was, as you are empowering these people and giving them tasks, do they follow through? Back to integrity. And he who's given, more is given. And so you give them more responsibility. So I look back on lessons learned. What has this person done? And whether it was sports, academics, achievement, what have they done? Where are they going in life? What are they doing? And then how do we coax them along? Now, back to to be more precise to your question, I don't think everyone can lead.
Yeah.
I think you can learn some skills to get you from A to B, but I think there's an elasticity to our personalities. I have a friend who's an accountant, and she is an extraordinary accountant. She's not a leader. Mm-hmm. it would discombobulate her to give her a group of accountants whom she had to lead and manage. And she's done that. But she finds more joy having her own business, having a few clients on her terms. I have another friend that owns a mortgage company, and he's really not that great with mortgages, but he knows how to find talent, and he knows how to lead people, and he is making a very successful business for him and a lot of employees because he knows how to do mortgages. My wife's a realtor. She likes to work alone. She doesn't want to hire other realtors to work with her. She doesn't want to manage other people. She's got an elasticity with clients, with inspectors, with lenders. And so each of us, we do have an incremental, let's say a sphere of leadership.
Yeah.
If I take a golf ball and throw it on the ground, it makes a golf ball size dent. If I take a bowling ball and throw it on the ground, it makes a bowling ball size dent. And some of us are a little more dense, so we can make a bigger dent. And God uses us in spite of us. So I think to the high level is not everybody can lead. You're going to find out by trying.
Yeah.
I can't run a 4-minute mile. It doesn't matter how many trainers, diets, videos, programs. I would never run a 4-minute mile, period. Does that mean I'm a worthless person? No. It means I'm not a 4-minute miler.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is shifting gears just a little bit, but I'm also curious with your experiences as a pastor and then also having friends that are in the business world. Have you seen misunderstandings in churches at large between its business people and its pastors? And if so, what's to be done about that?
Most pastors are pretty clueless about, now I'm speaking of my generation, are pretty clueless about businessmen and women. We went to the seminary. We spent all our years in books, and we don't understand commerce. We also, and I would say this for most pastors, I think younger pastors are learning at a better curve than we did, but most of us were uncomfortable with wealth. We were uncomfortable asking or talking about money. We were uncomfortable with the business side of church, hiring and firing. And again, as I said earlier, we've overcompensated. The church has become a business, in my view. And it's run by young entrepreneurial people, in my point of view. So spirituality has been set aside. So we're always overcompensating. We weren't right and they're wrong, or vice versa. What I do observe in this chapter of life is I have friends that are extraordinarily wealthy. And they're not impressed with me, and I'm not impressed with them. We're friends.
Yeah.
I respect what they've done, and so a very wealthy, powerful person invites me to go with him or her on a trip or vacation or have us over for a dinner that we couldn't afford, and I'm in their home, and I'm a good enough friend now with this person that I'm not in your league. Why would you? And I remember this happened. I was 20 years old, and this guy gave me that dope slap, so to speak, and he said, "I respect you for who you are, for what you've accomplished. You are, let's call it a subject matter expert, SME, in Bible and theology. I learned from you things I don't know. I didn't go to seminary. I don't know the Bible like you do. I don't study it like you do. You contribute to my life. I'm a business person. I do this on the backstroke. This is routine for me." And so he gave me an education when I was in my late 20s to say, look, I respect you for who God is. And what I learned from that, Kent, was people of wealth and power and success, they smell it if you're after them for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
If you just want to be their friend, learn from them, if you can cut up with them and not be a jerk, there's a capital that you build in that relationship. So I would say the younger generation gets business better than I did at that chapter. The problem is the church has become a business. The title changes for employees. We're not pastors anymore. We're directional leaders. We're strategic visionary thinkers. We're arts directors. And I'm not saying that's wrong. It's reflective of the change in the church culture. And it has become a business model. Strategic opportunities, and so just the language of business has worked its way into the fabric of the church. And I would critique that. I would say, are you sharing the person and work of Jesus Christ? Is that more important than your business model? And I love the business model. I love people that can figure out budgets and buildings and missions, but what it's going to cost to do this or that. We need that. That's the contribution of leadership and gifting in the body of Christ that we need.
Yep.
But I'm going to argue 3 things run the church: money, vision, power. Let's just be real baseline: money, vision, and power. I was asked this question years ago, and they said, you can only control one. What do you want to control? Hypothetically. And I said, vision, of course. And he said, right. Because if you control vision, meaning lead the vision, money and power will follow. Mm-hmm. If you control power in the church, then you're a dictator. If you control money in the church, you're a business person who's filthy lucre. You're about money. Mm-hmm. And neither one of those they're important. Mm-hmm. But the vision is to make disciples of all ethnos, this is the Greek word, all nations, baptizing them, identifying them, and then the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. So we don't have to go to the mountain to find a vision, I don't believe. Mm-hmm. Jesus was really clear about the mandate, and then the greatest commandment, love your neighbor, so forth and so on. So the Bible's pretty clear on this issue. Mm-hmm. Back to business, we're always overcompensating, usually unconsciously. Yeah. And I think I will predict in 8-10 years, you're going to see another recalibration. Churches will get tired of the programs, the strategy, strategic language, on the multi-campus venue, all the technology, the live streaming. I mean, goodness me, oh my, it's going to be very different in 10 years.
Yeah. So you think we're within 10 years of sort of wearing off on some of that stuff?
I think it's already showing.
Well, I would agree with that. And I think it's about time.
The multi-church thing has had its day.
Okay.
It's going to flatten out real fast.
Okay.
There are always exceptions.
Sure.
And I don't mean to speak ill of anyone. The Vineyard Movement with John Wimber, Rick Warren, Purpose-Driven Movement, Bill Hybels, the Willow Creek, the Seeker model, all those have flattened. I mean, the Vineyard Movement's gone. There are a handful of vineyard churches in the country. The purpose-driven church is still very alive and thriving, but the purpose-driven marketing is gone. There's no more purpose-driven life seminar, no more purpose-driven country seminar. They let go of a lot of those people. And to Rick's credit, he's recalibrated.
I see.
And I respect that.
I see.
Of course, the Hybels and the Saddleback Willow Creek model is a different story, but the seeker-sensitive thing flattened out a long time ago.
Yeah.
And the Willow Association did a study on that called Reveal. Remember the study they did?
Okay, I don't remember that.
Okay, so Willow Creek was the seeker-sensitive service. So, get rid of hymnology. Don't quote Spurgeon. You want to have the 6-part series on how to be a good friend. I mean, it was bring your non-Christian friend. Great. So forth and so on, which was what Robert Schuller was doing in the 70s on television in a different way. Nothing's new. And so they did this big study called Reveal, and they found out their people weren't clear on the gospel. They weren't becoming disciples. And so they came to a church I was involved with at the time, and they had done their study, and they wanted us to be one of the guinea pigs to use their new study on how to get the church back into discipleship. And I'm not very diplomatic, and I said to them, are you kidding me? You've been doing this wrong for how long? And 8 weeks later, you got the solution?
Yeah.
And, of course, they weren't happy with me, nor was my staff, but I didn't care. I got nothing to prove. Yeah. I said, I'm sorry. I'm not Willow Creek or Saddleback or the First Big Church of the world, but I'm trying to make disciples. That's what Jesus said.
Yeah.
And I can point you to some people that I think are learning to be disciples.
Yeah.
Not because of me, but because we're doing it's like stewardship. If you manage your money, live under your income, spend less than you earn, you give, you avoid debt, over time, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
You will be fine.
Yeah.
That's not, you don't have to go get an MBA from Wharton to know that, know. And so the same with the church. Are you making disciples? So I think a lot of this stuff, it all cycles. Hendricks, again, my professor, Dr. Hendricks, said, give it 10 years. Mm-hmm. Give it 10 years. The churches I grew up in where the Bible was a book, there was a 45-minute sermon, the music was pretty much, boring. It was an organ and some people that probably shouldn't be singing songs. That church existed from 1940 to 1980 and did an awful lot of good that nobody ever acknowledges.
Yeah.
Did they recalibrate? No.
Mm-hmm.
But there's only two things that are eternal: God's word and God's people.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and you touched on something that I see is really sad is, there's a law in marketing. There's a law of the category. Like you get one, like FedEx, you think of like overnight shipping, but you get one, like Snickers is like, are you hungry or whatever? You get one spot in people's mind.
That's good.
And I've seen some of these pastors in my mind. I mean, this is just, I'm not a pastor. And I understand there's equal dignity on whether you're a business person or a pastor. Okay. But in my mind, there is a specialness to the role of a pastor, and you're expositing the gospel. You're expositing God's word. Okay. Why would you ever try to have a different category than that? Be the leadership expert when you're a pastor. Please be a pastor, because we need pastors. So you're touching on something that I have wondered about and felt like maybe we're taking the leadership thing a little too far in some cases.
Part of it, I would just add, I think a lot of these, the church in America, of course, is very different than it was even 2 decades ago, but 95% of the churches in America are less than 100 people.
Wow.
So you can argue God likes small churches, or pastors are really crummy leaders, or somewhere in between. Of those churches that I have known and had friends who've pastored and struggled at small churches, many of them are ill-equipped. Some of them are in a static community. If you're in a small town in Ohio, if you're in Peoria, Illinois, you're not going to have a catchment of thousands of people to be a mega church or a super church. If you have a church of 100 or 200, that may be the infrastructure God gives you to serve in.
Yeah.
Now, some of those pastors, and I've spoken to them in workshops for decades, they're lazy, they're indolent in the Scripture, they really don't like their job, they're overweight, they're unkept, their marriage is so-so, and I go back to integrity. And are you in the Word? Are you growing? Are you candid with your struggles? Are you and your wife growing? Are you pouring into people? I would tell these young guys, of course, ministries change. I say, you want to get to 1 Timothy, in your speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example. Mm-hmm. Your speech, what you say, conduct, what you do, love, what you show, faith, what you believe, purity, what you intend. In your speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example, a tupos. And Paul is telling the younger Timothy there how to deal with older men. In your speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example. And so I would teach these pastors' workshops and say, guys, because in God's kindness, I had a pretty good run with elders most of the 30 plus years I was in church. There's always exceptions, but and I won't say it was me, because I was crosswise with elders even in recent years, but I would pursue those guys. I want to go see where they work, take them a lunch, buy them a coffee. Let's go on a vacation as a couple. And you can do this in any size church with key leaders or people that might be leaders. Pursue these people that God loves and died for. Mm-hmm. And as you get to know their heartache and their hurt and their humanity, they'll follow you anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's not an abusive thing. That's like, what's important to you, Kent? When you go home, your marriage, your struggle, your challenges. I mean, and the fact that somebody cared about that, and before you left lunch, say, hey, can we pray about that? That's pretty powerful business.
Yeah. Yep.
Instead of strategic marketing, satisfaction, we deliver, Coke is it. I mean, you take your pick. Business world's over-infiltrated ministry mindset, probably to a large degree.
Yeah. Now, another thing that I know you care a lot about is discipleship. So I guess, is disciple making sort of for the everyday believer? And I think that's a bad question, because I think that answer is yes. But how do you see discipleship playing out successfully in the lives of busy people, or maybe even busy business people with a lot of leadership responsibility?
Busyness is an excuse. We all have 24 hours in a day. We all have 7 days a week. Nobody gets any more. C.S. Lewis, I think, said, saying I don't have enough time is like a fish in the ocean saying there's not enough water. So time is not our enemy. Time is our context, number one. So busyness is no excuse. Prioritization is what it requires. What's important. So back to one of your earlier questions about, focus and distractions and what leadership book do you read? we're wired differently. Let's go back to that. We're level ground. Not everybody's going to be able to do all these things. But I do believe we were commissioned by Christ to make disciples of all ethnos, baptizing them. And that's not about getting wet or mowed simply. That's about identifying them. Make mathetes, make a disciple. A disciple is not a disciple until he or she has reproduced. So if I'm a clarinet teacher and I teach my students to play clarinet, I'm just a teacher. If one of my students teaches clarinet, I have now made a disciple.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So discipleship is multiplication. And Paul to Timothy, entrust to faithful men what? Who will be able to teach others also. Mm-hmm. And that entrust term is a banking term. Put it somewhere where it's invested. Mm-hmm. Back to the fat man, faithful, available, teachable. Give it to somebody who's going to utilize it. So discipleship, number one, we have overwrought this whole thing like we always do. We've got programs. We've got fill-in-the-blank books. Let's go back. What did Jesus do? What did he say about mathetes? The rabbinic community in the first century completely understood discipleship. This was not a new term. There was a rabbi who had a following. If you visited an old school African American church, a buddy of mine in the south side of Chicago, he has his men. And they're from junior high to high school age, and they all got dress pants, a white shirt tucked in with a tie.
Okay.
And they are there, and they follow the pastor around all morning long. Back in his study, when he prays, when he's meeting with the deacons, when he goes up for the pulpit, they sit on the front row. Those are his men. And it's remarkable in the African-American culture how many of those kind of young men will go into ministry. Because an older man said, you need to tuck your shirt in. I want a tie on there next week. You know, I don't want those shoes. I want them tied up. Yep. Don't let those pants be hanging. And he'll tell them that. Yeah. I don't want those pants hanging on your back. I want them up with a belt.
Yeah.
And some older man took interest. Not all of them, but he's discipling young men. Yeah. Jesus spent time with them. And that picture, I digress, that picture is a rabbinic picture. You studied under a rabbi. You ever seen these movies where they have a Jewish synagogue classroom, and the rabbis at the end, they use these little scribal things, and they're reading the Hebrew text, and they're talking about it. And the rabbinic model was, you didn't say, I think this verse means, or what does this mean to you? The rabbinic model was, Rabbi Shemel said this about this verse. Rabbi Gamaliel said this. It was case law. So you cited the scholars of what they said about the problem with that passage. So the students, the rabbinical studies, understood discipleship better than the Gentile. So you're following a master teacher to become like him. So let's go back to first century. That's what he commissions them, make disciples of all nations. He sends them out in pairs and couples, come back. By the time we have the New Testament, the model's there. Acts 2:42, the disciples are devoted to teaching, to prayer, to fellowship, breaking bread, and they're instructing and training them to make disciples of all ethnos. Isn't that a cool word? Ethnic groups. Not just the ones that look like you and me, all ethnos. So the gospel isn't hard. We make it complicated.
Yeah.
So I go to a simple formula. Jesus took 3 years to spend with 12 guys, and one was a defector. I'm not saying there's any magic number. Cindy and I use a 2-year program. And the prioritization of a busy person is, this is a lot of time. You don't have to do this. I'm not going to guilt or shame you to do it. 2 things are eternal: God's word and God's people. Your business is an eternal. Your money is eternal. Your empire is eternal. The last house you buy is an eternal. People and God's word. So I decided early in my life, I'm going to put my shoulder to that wheel. And I joke about, God lets me pretend I'm pushing. Yeah.
So you have this model where you will take, is it 12 or 15 or?
So
10,
what we've done, and it varies, Kent. What we've done most recently is we handpick 5 or 7 or 8 couples, We vet them.
Okay, you and your wife are doing this together?
We have right now. We've taken a hiatus.
Okay.
I'm dabbling with a group of men, and I've gone to them all. I pursued all of them one-on-one.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I said, okay, guys, this is a departure, recalibration for what I've been doing. I got about a 2-year idea in mind. Let's talk through it. I haven't had them sign the deal yet, but it will be the same what we do with couples. What we do with couples is we handpick these couples. We vetted them. They fill out an application. We'll meet with them and talk to them. And so what our program looked like was 2 years, every Sunday night in our home for about 2.5 to 3 hours. And then if you and your wife were in our group, you're on my rotating schedule. I'm going to take you to lunch every 4, 5, 6 weeks on my schedule. We're going to do group activities with the guys, with the gals. We're going to do a service project during the year if we can find a good one to do. I hate the cliche, doing life together,
Sure.
but we're involved in their lives.
Yep.
I can go do a service project. We had a guy who was deployed overseas. He had 5 kids. We went over and did their trim trees, yard work, mulch, stuff hadn't been done in years. And took this whole team over there. What I learned in that one day working with those young couples, I couldn't have learned in 6 months being in my house. Who were the workers? Who were the whiners? Who were the people that were creative? I mean, it was amazing what I learned in a 10-hour Saturday workday.
Yeah.
So, and then you're spending time with them one-on-one. I mean, I came to Tennessee 10 years ago, and all these guys were into guns. And so they're dragging me out, and we're shooting paper targets. And, I mean, I went into that. And, of course, now I'm knee-deep into it, But it was time and a common interest.
Yeah.
Now, it's my job as a discipler to ask the right questions.
Okay. Yep.
And then it becomes a two-way street. I learn as much from them as they do. But so 2 years, we take them through a How to Study the Bible program. We take them through a theology handbook, which is a stretch for a lot of them. But my contention is you've got to know the Bible, but you got to learn to think critically. And if I asked you, explain the baptism of the Holy Spirit to me, you're not going to turn to 3 verses and do that. You're going to need a theological grid to understand when baptisms occurred, why they occurred, why did the Jews baptize, because they did, and then how does that translate to what Jesus said when he said to baptize people, and what does it mean today? So that's theology.
Yep.
So we're going to take them to how to study the Bible, how to think theologically, and then we'll talk about their marriage along the way. So we did that for 2 full years.
I see.
And then the end of it is, okay, you and your wife, you need to go do the same.
Okay. So that's sort of the understanding coming in. Yeah.
That's the high bar coming in.
Yep.
I'm going to give you 2, and I'm not going to play golf, and I'm not going to do all the social things I could usually do because that Sunday's locked in, and my lunches are locked in. So a busy businessman or woman, maybe they don't do that. That's not wrong, but at the end of the day, I have a friend who's a financial planner, and he's been doing it. He and his wife took the challenge, and they're doing it.
Yep.
And doing a great job of it, and having a ball.
Yeah.
And it's fun. I love hanging around these young couples because I don't think the way they think, and I need to learn what's important to them. And that's where I think we bridge that gap where the old dismiss the young disrespect the old, and we miss all this in the middle.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that. Shifting gears a little bit, but we talk a lot about at Gospel Business Strategies, how should the gospel inform our stewardship of those unique privileges and responsibilities that business owners and business leaders have? And what are your thoughts on that?
Again, I'm not a businessman or woman. I mean, I've been involved in those capacities, but that's not my first stride. I'll go back to integrity. I'll go back to being very clear about what you're doing and why. People like clarity. If you're selling a widget, they want clarity. And the reason I'm doing this is because of my faith. I find it striking today. There's this great dialogue among what I'll call nominal Christians about the word gospel. But there's very little substantial discussion of the gospel. Some of my friends who would fall a little more reformed than me, who don't like me, I still love them, would be mad at me because I don't say the word gospel enough. I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but the gospel, the gospel, the gospel. And I'm going, can you define the gospel for me? The gospel, as Paul described it, was a very clear explanation of the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. All four of those are key. He lived, he died, he was buried, confirmation of his death, and he's resurrected. That's the core of the gospel. He got so far in Galatians to say, if any other gospel is preached, let them be accursed. Translated, let them go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
We don't change this gospel. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to use the word gospel strategy, my encouragement would be mindful, am I living out clearly as a business product? What motivates me is the life, death, burial, resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. I like to say the words and works of Jesus. Mm-hmm. That's a little less cliche than gospel right now. And so am I living the life of Christ in the way I treat people? We're afraid to talk about Jesus in a multi-ethnic culture where we're the last group you can beat up on. You can be a Muslim, a Hindu, you can be whatever, and we can't touch you. But if you're if you're a white male evangelical, you're the hitman, you're the whipping boy of the day. Yeah. And so I can encourage people all the time, can you smile when you talk about your faith? Mm-hmm. I'm glad that we live in a country that can have, quote, freedom of religion. This isn't my home. This is my country. Mm-hmm. This is my temporary residence right now. So I'm happy I live in a culture that can have an imam and a mosque and a Sikh and a Mormon ward and a Catholic church. I'm glad I live in that culture. Mm-hmm. But please understand, I hold a different view. Mm-hmm. And what my hope is pinned on is the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that he came back from the dead. He offers eternal life to any and all. So if I'm incorporating that in my business jargon or strategy, it would seem to me as a leader, I have a friend who owns a large manufacturing company here in Nashville, and he's been working for a year and a half on his business statement, and I helped him a little bit. I was blown away by what he came up with, and he's got, I want to say, 18 or 20 principles. And once a week, he takes one of them, writes a short email, and sends it out to all his staff and all his stores. Mm-hmm. And he is unapologetically a follower of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. It's his company, for goodness sakes. Yeah. He can say what he wants. Yep. And he can smile about it. Yep. And I think that's, to me, to give people courage. You don't have to get in an argument. Yes. You don't have to yell at somebody. Yep. Say, hey, I'm glad you believe what you believe. Is it okay that I believe that Christ saved me, he forgives me of my sins, and I love him, I'm trying to serve him with the best I can, and I want to be a man of integrity? Mm-hmm. If we're going to fight about that, that's a good fight to have, right? Sure. Yeah. So if we're going to use gospel and ministry and strategy and business as this nomenclature, I would just plea, goodness me, oh my, do you ever talk about the gospel? Mm. Just because you say the word, do you understand what you have said? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, nomenclature is important. Words have meaning. Words are powerful. Mm-hmm. And just because I say I'm a gospel Christian, or this is gospel preaching, or this is how, there's books that are unrelated. There's the Gospel of Guns book, I'm sure, out there. Sure, it just means good news in that vernacular. Yes. Yeah. But the way we use it, are we clear about our product, and are we clear about our Christianity? Yes. Without being mad about it. Yes. Yep. Yeah. And divisive. Yeah. That's good. I appreciate that. I wanted to make sure to ask about your time as CEO and president of Moody Bible Institute. And this is 05 to 8, right? So about 4 years or so. Shy of 4 years. So, I'm curious what it's like leading an organization with so much history. And I'd follow it up with a question of what do you see as some of the keys for this organization to actually have been around for so long? Because that is remarkable. Mm-hmm. It was the late 1800s-ish that it was started. 1886 was 1886. That date is still debated, 83 or 86. Okay. But 1886 is on the imprimatur. A long time. And I was just seeing one of our pastors this morning, and I asked him what I should ask you as it relates to Moody Bible Institute and your time there. And he just mentioned, the thing of it being around for so long, so many ministries come and go. So I'm curious to know how your time there was, and also what do you see some keys that
have been true for them that has kept this ministry around for so long?
So I was in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia for shy of 12 years in a very fascinating church, Emmanuel Bible Church inside the Beltway. And it was a big organization. We had 50 elders. I was at some level a leader, but I was still a pastor. Going to Moody, I became a corporate executive officer / president. I did not know what I did not know. And it was almost $100 million organization, 700-ish employees, 23 contiguous acres in downtown Chicago. Some of those buildings dating back, into the 20s. Dealing with Chicago politics. It was really a conglomerate, not just a corporation. We had a Bible College, aviation, publishing arm, radio broadcasting network, 38 O&Os, owned and operated stations, 2,000 some repeaters, graduate school. There was an axiom, the sun never sets on a Moody grad. Meaning that around the world, there are so many Moody graduates that there's always... 1 out of 3 missionary aviation pilots was trained by Moody.
Wow.
The history is rich. So going there was a learning cliff. You know what a layback is when you climb?
Yeah.
And so there's a sheer face, but there's a layback when you climb. It was a learning cliff on a layback going backwards. I was not a corporate person. They didn't hire me to be a corporate person, but that was the role. So it was a quantum change. I tell people it was a career change, really. To your point, historically, you're standing on a lot of shoulders. And my axiom was to honor the past and plan the future. And that was sort of the idiom that I used when I went there. I said, I'd be a fool to come in here. They were coming up on their 125th anniversary, 125 years. And, I'm a punk. Mm-hmm. Joel Stoll had been there, I believe, 16 years. My predecessor, Doc Sweeting, had been there 18 years. I was the 8th president in 100 plus years.
Wow.
So to your second question, which is really pertinent, Andover, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all these schools were seminaries to train men to be pastors. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Andover. Ivy League schools. There was an abstract, which is it's an article, but it's a scholarly article. There's abstract literature out there that most people never touch for good reason. But in the academic world, an abstract is basically like a thesis or a dissertation on a subject that's published. So you read abstracts if you're really bored or really wonky or just a geek academic. So there was an abstract written on the rise and fall of a theological seminary, and it was the case study of Andover. And Andover was, to get into Andover, Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, you had to be able to read Greek and Hebrew and have a Latin and French proficiency, because much of the theology was written in Latin and French, and you had to be able to handle the Bible in the original language to get into seminary.
Wow.
Men only. So B.B. Warfield at Princeton, the library there, it's like going back in time. It's like the most incredible room you've ever been in. But they are a completely liberal school today. The article, and forgive me for forgetting the author of the Andover Seminary piece, argued that it was the change of presidents and the change of board personnel that liberalism started leaking in. I don't think anything's new. And I've seen it in schools that I admire and respect. There has been we use the phrase tectonic, which you don't understand, not you personally, but people don't understand. Tectonic doesn't mean just big. Tectonic means underneath the earth's crusts, these two plates have been pushing at each other for a very, very, very long time under incredible heat and pressure, and finally something erupts above. That tectonic shift is a long time pressure coming. Right now, there's a school in Seattle area, Azusa Pacific, and there's a large student group, a large faculty and staff group that want to acknowledge LGBTQA associations and friendships under the moniker of Christian, and they formed this group and they made the headlines, and the board came out a week later and said no to that. I wrote, a friend of mine wrote an op-ed piece, and I wrote him privately, and I said, you missed the point in your op-ed piece. The faculty, staff, and students have not changed their opinion just because the board made a statement.
Mm-hmm.
And he dismissed me. He said, well, the point was they took a stand. And he totally dismissed what I wrote him. I said, you're writing a puff piece saying, look, they're standing firm. They're not standing firm. They wrote a little thing and put it on their website.
Yeah.
Hasn't changed the mind of one student, faculty, or staff that believes in an LGBTQA fill-in-the-blank relationship can be a Christian relationship. And so this is what's happened. This is the tectonic pressure going on. My theory, all institutions list away from the Bible at some point. And invariably, even my seminary that I love, Dallas Seminary, I don't think will last forever. They're coming up on their 100th anniversary here in 2024. And I pray to God they're different. I'm a bit of a cynic. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Andover are beautiful building testimonies, endowed edifices to liberalism. And the good news is the Church of Jesus Christ and seminaries are reborn in spite of human institutions. But once you get bureaucracy, it was John Gardner who talked about and this may be of some interest to the gospel business strategy. There's typically on a bell curve is a crisis of some kind. We need something. We need new technology. So Mevo comes along and we can do this cheaper and affordable. And there's this birth and it's exciting and we get people on board. I can do that. I can do that. All of a sudden we got this birth and we're setting up chairs and we're renting space. Then this little creep comes along called policy. I want to work from home. I want you to buy me the newest MacBook. I want the newest iPhone. I don't want to come in this office. I don't like working with that person. So we have to write a policy. You got to be in the office certain hours, and you got to work so many hours, and you got to get your billables done. And then what happens? Somebody has to manage that policy. That is called administration. So now we have policies we've written, which should be always and never. We always do this. We never do that. Oh, we make an exception. She's going to have a baby. We really like her. Oh, we're going to pay her maternity leave for 12 weeks. Oh, we got to keep her on. Can we give her so we start making exceptions. So what? Administration administers those policies. Now, what happened over here, Mevo, Apple, whatever, was a cool thing. It got organized, and now we have administration. Now, Gardner argued that the administration begins calcification and institutionalization. Now we're an institution.
Yep.
Big HR, big accounting, big rules, big policies, merit pays, all this stuff figured out, longevity, stock options, blah, 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 blah. The organization begins to die. What's required, according to Gardner, was a new crisis.
Okay.
A new birth of something. So when you look at a seminary, a business, I think that's true across the board, just as an observation of the life and death of an organization. Apple was a great example. I mean, they were almost gone. Scully's book, was it From Pepsi to Apple? I forget the title. And Jobs is wooing John Scully to leave his multi-million-dollar contract with Pepsi to come help Apple.
Yep.
And he leaves his driver in Manhattan lifestyle and goes to California. Has a 4x8 folding table. That's his desk. And the big line Jobs hooked him on is: do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want to change the world?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we can argue whether Steve Jobs changed the world or not, but he certainly made a lot of money, and a lot of people have employment because of that. What's happened to Apple are the crises, and the crises will rebuild the brand.
Yes.
And now you've got a culture that is institutionalized, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Andover, to a product, OS. And we're going to take this. That's one of the reasons I like the other version. We're going to take this and own you. Your television, your technology, the phone, the computer, your laptop, your pad, all that's going away. The phone, of course, is the primary piece, correct?
Yep.
Which is why we'll spend $1,000 on it now.
Yep.
When does that become institutionalized?
Yeah.
Is the folding phone going to be the new crisis that's going to move people? I don't know. Nobody does. So all that to say, church, organization, business, complex, the same thing is the birth and the crisis, which goes back to clarity and the gospel in your ministry, in your business. I would say call your business a ministry internally.
Mm-hmm.
We're ministering to this population by selling this service. We're web designers. We're graphics. We're renderers. Whatever you're doing, we can do a 3D model for you. We can do a computer-assisted design for you. I have a friend that's got a small company that makes unique medical devices, one of a kind. Started out making models as a kid. Now he makes titanium, gold, all these exotic metals for medical devices. He's supplying that to someone who needs it.
Mm-hmm.
Clarity. What am I doing? And can I smile and talk about it as a nature of the work of Christ to help people?
Yes. 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 Have you seen Moody go through those crises? Is that one of the things that you've seen that has helped them sort of remain true to mission and vision through the years?
One of the genius pieces of Moody was a subscription. Instead of having tenure, they have an annual subscription. There's only 2 or 3 colleges in the U.S. that do this. And each year, the faculty and board sign a subscription. And it was one of the first things when I went to Moody as president, CEO, which was interesting. It was a governance model. So we meet in this very elaborate board meeting, and the chairman raps a gavel, literally.
Okay.
And at that point, I'm an employee of the board.
Okay, yes.
And I'm reporting to them as the president of their corporation. When the meeting's over, they rap the gavel again. I am now the president, CEO that run the organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it was set up. One of the first functions we did was to read the doctrinal statement and sign it. And Kent, I'm 40, whatever years old, 42, 40, I forget how old I was when I went there, but I'm in tears reading this doctrinal statement. Going, these businessmen who give millions of dollars to this organization, who they love to death, they and I, we're reading this together and affirming 66 books of the Bible are inerrant. Jesus was a real person. The Holy Spirit indwells the believer. Sin, hell, death are real realities. The only way to Christ, the only way to God is through Christ's substitute. I mean, I'm weeping reading this statement, and we sign it and put it in a folder and put it in the fire safe. And then I go out to the faculty meetings, and most of the faculty are gold. There's always some whiners.
Sure. And
I did this or that. And if you're a president, you're going to take shots. You're a leader. And they were complaining about this, that, or the other. And I said, I sat and I told that story. I sat in that meeting. I cried with those men. Because you got to sign it too. And you got 2 choices. This is how diplomatic I am. You can sign it and teach it, or you can go find somewhere else to work.
Yeah. Next
question.
Yeah.
I'm not here to debate it.
Yep.
If you don't like it, go find a school that teaches something differently. And to me, that's back to the integrity of the employee. Would I go work for XYZ Corporation if I didn't believe in him or her and what they were standing for? That's stupid on me.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, if you want to change an organization, it's called being an entrepreneurial. Go start your own gig, Hint.
Yep.
Don't go try to change some company.
Yes.
Now, if they hire you as a change agent, that's a different digression. But my point is simply, at some level, Moody has survived because of that subscription. Now, will it survive? No. Entropy's tough to beat. Second law of thermodynamics. Everything's falling apart and decaying. Dallas Seminary won't last forever. Moody won't last forever. That's why we need reformers. That's why we need men and women with courage who can say, I'm not mad at the LGBTQAI organization group argument screaming at me. I'm not mad at them. I don't hate them. They may say I hate them because I'm a white evangelical male and I'm the whipping boy. They may say that. I don't, but I disagree. We can dialogue about this all you want. I'm not going to change the doctrinal statement.
Yeah.
It might happen on the next guy's watch.
Yeah.
I'll die on that hill or you'll fire me.
Yeah.
Both are valid consequences. So I think that's where the courage is needed to say an organization can stand. Now, does that mean you're going to succeed? No. But you'll succeed in being faithful, which is more important than just being successful.
So I got to be selective here with my last couple of questions for the sake of time. But I am curious, what is your process for creating content to communicate? And I'll see if I phrase this question properly. But you're a pastor, you have Micro inContext, You've written a book or books, and so you're creating a lot. How do you go from an idea of what you want to communicate to making sure that the big blocks are in the right place so that you walk people through this communication journey? Maybe it's a sermon or it's something you're writing, or maybe it's just something you're communicating on the podcast. How do you go from an idea of what you want to communicate to actually structuring that and then communicating it properly and making sure you're covering the right things and communicating it clearly?
It's a great question. And I can't apply it to a business context. In some respects, that takes a lot more brains and brawn than I have. Because if I was going to try to sell a widget or a process or a product, that's where I'd lean on other people. Mm-hmm. From a biblical theological lens, my idea is here. I don't have to create it. Mm-hmm. So I'm teaching through 2 Peter right now at our little church, and I start with a paragraph, and I read it and read it and read it, read it, and I can walk you through a little bit of a process of what I do to write a message. But to me, my job is to communicate what this says, so that when you're done enduring listening to me for 40 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it may be, going, I see where he got that from. Mm-hmm. I'm not clever. I'm not slick. I don't have acrostics. I don't have, a lot of word spins and plays. Some of these people are brilliant communicators. I listen to them. I'm mesmerized. They also probably have 10 of those messages in their back pocket, is where I got to produce 48 a year or more.
Sure.
If I'm speaking somewhere else.
Yep.
So it's a little harder to be, my friend Jerry Jenkins, who's written 215 books, he's got a different life than I have. Mm-hmm. He sits himself in a chair and writes he has a writing by word objective. So I'm going to write, let's say, 800 words this week or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And he writes to goal, to deadline, he calls it. Mm-hmm. So what I have to do is start with the subject. So the way I communicate then, I like bell curves. Before we had computers, when we still had typewriters, I had a 8.5 by 11 sheet that I had thumbtacked on my wall, because I faced the wall, and I drew a bell curve. And I had the disenfranchised teenager who didn't go to a youth group and the widow or widower. And then I filled it in with generalizations of the numbers of people. This is the young married with kids, one's college-age kids, empty nesters, so forth and so on. And then I would write adjectives across it. Disenfranchised teenagers, lonely. Old person's lonely. Single person's, worldview is narrow. The typical man my age who was raising 4 kids feels strapped and enslaved to a job to take care of his 4 ingrate children. Yep. Whatever it is. And I would write adjectives across it. Yep. So when I'm writing this message and I'm looking up at the wall, I'm going, how does Irv, a widower, hear that? How does John, that young, awkward kid who won't go to youth group but likes to hear that pastor for whatever reason, why does that young couple who I can feel the distance between them when they sit in the room? And so now I'm thinking, what is God's word, big blocks, what is he telling them? And then how do I say that in a palatable way so they can hear it? You can do this to people and wear at their sternum, hitting them in the chest. You can be cliche. You can be clever. I want it to be clear. And I want them to say, I see where you got that. Yeah. And I tell young pastors who are all trying to be the next, I won't name names, but we all have heroes that we love in the pulpit or we love on podcasts, and be that as it may. Paul says something about that in Corinth about I'm of Cephas, I'm of Apollos, anyway, I digress. But I don't want that. I want them to look at the Bible. And so I tell these young guys, lean on the text, depend on the text. Don't try to be clever. Yes. You don't need flash paper. You don't need a super cool, a video promo. You don't need an animation for your series. You don't need pro presenter people to work, 20 hours on a little 18-second thing for you. Yeah. Teach the Bible. Yep. Make disciples of all ethnos, teaching them. Yep. Baptize them, teaching them to observe all that I told. There's a lot of all that I told you in here. Yeah, there is. Yes. So the joy is the burden's here, Kent, not on me being creative and clever. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's a faithful way to view your teaching, certainly. Yep. And I would say, you mentioned some things there that I feel like I know less about your generation, but I know our generation is craving authenticity. So like for me, and I feel like my generation, it's refreshing to hear you say, we're not going to try to be clever. We're going to be clear. We're going to stick true to the word. It's authenticity. It's being genuine, having integrity.
Authenticity is, and I'm 61. My parents, the builder generation, they were too afraid. They had no resources. They were trying to survive a post-war world. And I think we need to understand they weren't mean or bad or ill-suited. Had we grown up in the Depression and the heels of World War II like my parents did, our worldview is very differently. Mm-hmm. So let's give them honor where honor is due. They didn't have emotions and feelings. They had no time for them. Mm-hmm. They're trying to survive. I visited my uncle years ago. My dad had two brothers. They all passed away. And I visited him. He never married, lived in a small town in Ford City, Pennsylvania, and worked for Pittsburgh Plate Glass for 42 years, union worker, PPG, and never married, had routine. He took his lunch, walked over to the plant, got off at 3:28, went over to Kelsey's bar, had a beer, went home every day, bought himself a new Chevy every 3 years, whether he needed it or not, just a man of routines. And they took pictures a lot in the 20s, a lot of black and white photos. So we're looking at these albums, and I'm saying, Uncle Denny. I said, tell me about a good time, a fun memory you had as a kid. And unvarnished, he said, Michael, those were damn hard times. I don't have any good memories.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't my objective to cheer Uncle Denny up. I was just asking. Mm-hmm. Now, my father was the youngest of those three boys, and my dad had a much more jovial view of life just because he was 18 months younger and a different personality. Fast forward to today, authenticity. My dad, before we passed away, we had to work in our relationship to find a common ground. Mm-hmm. This culture is longing for it because it's been so absent. And then when you have the problem or the megalomaniac or the expose about what this guy's doing, you go, see. Well, it's real easy to point out a guilty victim. When smoking gun videotape, DNA evidence, see, we hate him or her.
Yeah.
Well, authenticity is the bridge that says the ground of Calvary's level, baby. Mm-hmm. I struggle with money, sex, and power like everybody does. Mm-hmm. I struggle with, overeating. I struggle with fill in the blank, appetites. But we don't stop there. Mm-hmm. If we just identify as we both have struggles, well, what's this say?
Yeah.
When I talk to these young guys, you think God cares about your money? Yeah. God cares about your job? Yeah. Think he cares about raising your kids? Yeah. Think he cares about your sex life? Wait. When does he not care about something in your life?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's part of what our older generation couldn't get to.
I see. Okay.
And so I think what we're learning, now I differentiate between transparency and nakedness.
Sure. Okay.
You need to be transparent, but you don't need to be naked.
Yes. Fair point.
And when it becomes catharsis, and I'm going to tell you all my stories, and it's all about me, now we've gone too far.
Yes. You don't need to be vomiting your problems all over everybody. And when totally agree. So I'm going to have to skip some questions. I'm going to have to go to the last one. But I am curious. Our listeners are largely business people trying to honor Christ with their business, with the responsibilities, raising kids, the busy schedule, just like everyone has these days. But if you were just to sort of leave our listeners with one piece of advice, what might that be?
Study Psalm 101. Psalm 101 is what I call David's "As for me and my house." And he begins, I will sing of loving kindness and justice. To thee, O Lord, I will sing praise. It's a vertical thing. It's a choice to worship. And then he begins talking about integrity. And he says 3 times in there, he uses the word integrity. He says, I will walk within my house in the integrity of my heart. I will set no worthless thing before my eyes. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not fasten its grip upon me. And what he's saying is that the place I'm best known, I'm all alone, where nobody sees me, I'm going to keep my integrity. He makes a vertical choice to worship God. I'm going to worship God. And now, the way I live the commerce of life, the commerce of business, I'm going to do it with such integrity that I'm squeaky clean. And I find it striking. That's called an inaugural psalm, probably written for his when he became king after Saul dies. But the inaugural, it ends with this cryptic phrase about he'll dispense with evil on a regular basis, that he won't tolerate evil in his cabinet, let's say it that way. I will walk within my house in the integrity of my heart. Where does David get in trouble? On the roof of his house, overlooking Bathsheba, when he should have been at war. And David is a phenomenal leader king because he's repentant, and that's why he's called a man after God's own heart. So we're going to sin. We're going to fail. It's not a permission slip. It's an acknowledgement. When he failed, he repented. And he writes Psalm 51, if I could offer sacrifice, I would. If there was, in other words, if there was a provision in the law, I would do it. Subtext, I'm supposed to be killed for what I did.
Yes.
I murdered a man. I had an adulterous relationship with a woman. She has a baby that dies. I take her in and marry her as my umpteenth wife. God, you should kill me, but I fall in your mercy. So a vertical choice every day as a man or woman in your business to say, this is about God, not just me making a buck or helping people. A vertical choice to worship. And then a horizontal, where's my integrity lie? And then third and last, he looks at a community of people. He says, only the faithful will minister to me. And that term minister in Hebrew means to serve or work alongside. Only faithful people. So your circle, back to where we began, the people that know my secrets, know my soul, know when I need a dope slap, know when I need encouragement. Three things: vertical toward God, horizontal integrity toward people that I work with, and a downward, this is my community of, inward and my integrity, and a horizontal with the men and women who I trust and who trust me. And that to me is, quote, I hate to say this, the key to success in the Christian life.
Yes.
A vertical worship, an inward awareness of integrity and the desperation I need that, and a community of people that will tell me the truth and walk with me thick and thin.
Yes. Well, Michael, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kent.
Appreciate it.